in this land of the rule of money. What's unspoken is that you can convince people to vote against their own interest, and you can distract them from the things that really matter, like public education, having a locally controlled school board, like healthcare, like women's health, like democracy. Because under the rule of money, where you sit on the TV, watch the TV, and the TV tells you how to vote, what's lost is human contact. What's lost is any discussion about what we as a community, what kind of place we as a community want to create. What quality of life we want to have right here in Oregon. What's lost is any discussion about the barriers that we have to overcome in order to create that kind of community that we want to live in. What's lost is the will of the people. I see, when I go all over Wisconsin, there are a lot of people who are not ready to give up on their local community. And they're running for school board, and for county board, and for city council, and for town chair. I come from the sand mine capital of North America, in western Wisconsin. Sand mines, 1,000 acres, all the trees gone, all the topsoil gone, great big hole in the ground. As the hills are taken down with bulldozers who load this 500 million-year-old sand on trucks and on the railroad cars and ship it out to North Dakota and down to Texas to be used in something called fracking, where the earth is fractured and the sand is mixed with a stew of chemicals, and that is created under great pressure to open up the fissures in the earth so the natural gas and some oil can be extracted. And we are living in the state that provides more sand to the fracking industry than any other state. And it is an industry that has exploded in western Wisconsin. There are over 100 mines, the majority of them in my district, and a quarter of them in one county, Trempealeau. In fact, there is one area where there are 5 mines within 5 miles and 2 subdivisions filled with small children in the middle of the circle. And the people of Trempealeau County tried very hard to get a moratorium to stop the further expansion of mines. And they failed earlier this year by 1 vote. And they went to the county supervisors and they said, you need to talk with the doctor and you need to talk with the physician assistant because they know some things about what's happening. And they talked to the health department and they educated those county board supervisors. And they helped those county board supervisors understand that it was not what it looked like at first. That silicone is a carcinogenic chemical that can cause silicosis, which is akin to asbestosis, upper respiratory problems. And that the lights in their bedroom windows from the mines and the noise and the depletion of the groundwater wasn't nearly as bad as the little children having a lifelong lung disease. And you know what? The county board changed its mind and at the end of August reversed its decision and unanimously passed a moratorium based on health and safety. And things slowed down until just a few weeks ago. And 2 things happened a few weeks ago. The first one was in the Capitol. Senator Tiffany, who was the author of the Up North mining bill, well, he didn't write it, but he didn't put his name on it. He introduced a bill that would take away the police powers of local government. And police powers, if you remember your local government classes, that's the ability of the local community to protect health and safety. Many of these communities were not zoned, and they used their police powers to create ordinances that protected the local people. Like, if you're going to blast near my farm, you better give me 24 hours notice. If I'm a mine and I use up your well and you don't have a well anymore, you better drill me a new one. Common sense, good neighbor protections. Well, this bill would strip those communities of their powers to be able to write these ordinances and thus invalidate dozens and dozens of ordinances. But it went farther than that. This bill prohibits any town, city, county, or village from passing any ordinance anywhere in the state protecting air, water quality, water quantity, the use of explosives, and damage to roads. It would affect the city of Oregon, all across the state. Now, it may have been no accident that 3 days before this bill was introduced, up in Ashland, the County Board of Supervisors was considering regulating the use of explosives in ground that was laden with asbestos. This bill would invalidate that ordinance. At the same time, the mines, who I have to tell you have more resources than I have ever seen in western Wisconsin, have a history of paying 10 to 15 times the price of land when they buy the land. They managed to convince first the city of Independence and then the city of Whitehall 1 week later, just this week, to annex the 1,000-acre mines, 2 of them next to each other, into the city itself, so they could get out from the moratorium that the county had passed, based on health and safety. Well, the people from western Wisconsin showed up in droves to the hearing, but Senator Tiffany saw it more fruitful for him to spend a lot of time talking with the Madison lobbyists and not listening to the people until the very end. And by that time, many of them had to get back on the bus and go back up to western Wisconsin. But they've not given up. And I see all across the state people who are waking up to what has happened to our state when the rule of money has taken over. And I believe that we stand right on the edge of that rule of money. Where will it go? I've been all around the state listening to folks, and they want information. Just like the folks on the county board in Trempealeau County. Local people in the west and in the north need information. And sometimes even our neighbors in Dane County need that information. So I have a challenge to you. Help me develop a network of communication, because I believe there is an imaginary chasm somewhere in Columbia County, and all of the news from Madison and Milwaukee falls into that chasm, and very little makes it up the other side to Wausau or Toma, and certainly none of it ever makes its way to Trempealeau or Buffalo County or Langlade County or Oneida County. So here's one of my ideas. Please, if you know somebody on the other side of that chasm, talk to them. Call them up, send them an email. We've learned how to communicate, and we don't have very good broadband in western Wisconsin. Facebook is very intensive for use of broadband, lots of videos and pictures. So what I suggest you do, if you happen to know one of these people on the other side of the chasm, is don't be afraid to take a really good article and cut and paste it into an email and send it to them. Because you know what? Folks by me are sometimes afraid of opening those attachments, and clicking on a link can take a little too long when you have a dial-up connection. So don't be afraid to reach out to them. And everybody knows somebody that they can reach out to. And I believe we need to intentionally develop a communication network where people on Facebook or on Twitter take the information and put it in an email. And those people that get the email, they take the information and turn it into a letter to the editor. And those folks that read those newspapers, and think about this, I have 24 newspapers in my district, most of them rural weeklies. Take that information from the letter to the editor and turn it into a conversation at the co-op or at the coffee shop. Because you know what? The coffee shop is where it's at, folks. That's where people get their news. This is something that all of us can do, whether it's somebody down the street or somebody across the state. Because I believe that we, all of us, every one of us, hold the power in our hands to help people connect the dots between who they voted for, what's happening in the Capitol, and what's happening in their neighborhood. And that is part of the answer to beating Scott Walker. We need to communicate like we never communicated before. And I saw this work when my friend Gaylord Opegard, who is the Democratic chairman of Jackson County, and he was on a bus from the edge of Madison to downtown Madison to go to help out with the protests in the winter of 2011, and he met a guy named Earl. And Earl was one of those rare but very important Democrats from Waukesha. And Earl was fired up and motivated, and he was ready to go. And he said, "Why don't those people out in western Wisconsin understand what's happening?" And Gaylord said, "They have no idea what's going on. In western Wisconsin, some of our folks, we think the capital's vaguely in St. Paul." Well, that's all we ever heard about. Folks want to vote for me and Al Franken. So here's our challenge. Help get over that divide. Find somebody. So Earl sends the emails to Gaylord and finally even got him on Facebook. And then Gaylord sends all the information out to his people in Jackson County. And then they know to take that information and turn it into a letter to the editor. And then the other guys, the guys that had the time, they take the letter to the editor under their arm down to the co-op and down to the coffee shop, and they talk about what's there. And we could be doing this a lot better than we're doing it. And this is going to make a difference. And it's a slow process to convince people to change their minds. But you know what? It was done in Trumpeldor County, and it can be done again. And it needs to be done all over the state. Thank you. This takes a huge effort. There's no guarantee of success, but frankly, I don't think there's an alternative. Because we can't live in the state that the folks that are behind the corporatization of public education want to create for us. And we certainly don't want them to be meddling with our voting laws and meddling with our health care and all the other stuff that they're meddling with. And why do they want to take away our ability to vote? Because you know what? That's the thing that's still local. People still vote at the town hall and the city hall. They still go down there and talk to folks about who they're gonna vote for. And we need to dominate those conversations. And we have a goal. And it's much bigger than getting rid of Scott Walker. Here is the goal. Has anyone ever been to the governor's conference room in the Capitol? A very beautiful room covered with art. Up on the ceiling in the governor's conference room, over the table, the seat of power, are written the words of Bob LaFollette. The will of the people is the law of the land. We need to take those words down, put them on that table, and turn them into the action of everyone that sits at that seat of power. And that's the vision I want you to keep in your mind when we're working to take our state back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathleen. I'm sure that there's more than one question in this room for Kathleen. And so we have a mic here, and it won't stretch to the back of the room. What I'd like to ask you to do is, if you have a question for Kathleen, Nancy, could you come? Nancy will have the microphone right here in the middle of the room. If you have a question for her, please come, state your question into the microphone, and give her a chance to answer it.
There you go. Come on then.
I have to keep filming and do this at the same time. Okay, so that was a very nice speech, and I appreciate all the information. However, I'm sure many of these folks are here to really hear you talk about what your plans are for running for governor. And we all know that Mary Burke has already gotten some major endorsements. And so I'd like to hear what your thoughts are about if you're considering changing your mind about your schedule for announcing your candidacy for governor of Wisconsin.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. My plan is to spend the next, well, we've got a few weeks out of November, but until the beginning of December, the middle of December, traveling around the state, talking and listening, talking about organizing, asking people where they are, finding out if there is the energy and the support and the network to run a grassroots campaign. After that, I'm going to take some time off with Christmas and put the pieces of the puzzle on the table and see if the pieces are there. I'm very excited that the response that I've gotten has been very, very positive. People really do want change. So I'm very hopeful that I'll be able to make a decision soon, and I think that decision right now, my timeline is probably the middle of January, but certainly the very, very beginning of the new year. And you will remember that the governor has decided that he has not yet made an announcement, and his timing is the first of the year. Now, this is an interesting time that we're living in because this is the governor that just released his book and very much wants to run for president. And I believe he's trying to make a decision right now on whether or not the house of cards that was the last state budget is going to stay up enough for him to get through the first budget next, the next budget. Yeah, or whether it's going to completely fall down. So that's another part of the mix. But thanks for the question, and I'm definitely getting around. And if you want to help me, there's a sign-up sheet up there, and definitely having enough money to pay just a few staff members is part of the equation. So if you want to donate, I'm very happy to accept your donations. And there are some cards and envelopes in the back. Yes, the lady in the beautiful lady in the pink scarf.
I've got the microphone. So just if you could just maybe give your first name and where you're from, and then a question. I'm going up to Mike first.
She's waving the cards.
Yes.
That's all she wanted.
Got it.
She didn't need to tell her.
You're next.
Senator, my name is Mike. I'm from Oregon.
Hi, Mike.
And I want to thank you for the nice piece that you put out last month on women's health.
Well, thank you.
And one of the things you said in that was that you thought abortion should be safe, rare, and legal. And we have a law on the books in this state that says that a woman can go to jail for 6 months and her doctor can go to prison for 5 years if she has an abortion. As governor, what would you do about that law?
Well, I certainly would enforce it, and the law needs to be repealed, but I am not, how should I say this? I understand that we need the votes in the legislature to repeal it. There's a lot of pieces that need to be repealed in that law, in that statute right now, and that's certainly one of them. The biggest challenge that we face right now with regard to abortion is accessibility, being able to get to a place that can help provide the service that is and should be safe and legal. And I don't know if you saw the other three-ring circus that was happening in the Capitol today, but there are 2 more abortion bills that are coming through that may be on the schedule for next Tuesday when the full Senate comes. Yeah. So I don't know where this is going to end, but I definitely do think that there should not be a woman in this state that would ever vote Republican again. And part of our strategy has to reach those GOP members. To go back to your original question, I don't know a single woman, pro-life or pro-choice, that would agree with that law.
Here's the next question.
Women senators, Mike. Some of your Republican women senators.
Yeah, well, I don't know if they're actually representing their constituents like one would hope all of us would. Who else they're representing?
My name is Marilyn. My question is more of a strategy kind of question. I was disappointed that about Planned Parenthood's decision today. I went into your frequently asked questions and read all of the detail. How are you going to get that detail out into the media to kind of negate that Planned Parenthood decision of supporting another candidate?
Well,
Endorsing.
there have been a couple of endorsements in the last couple weeks, but I don't think that any of those endorsements are a surprise. You probably know that the gal that's running Mary Burke's campaign had deep ties to Emily's List. She actually used to work for Emily's List. She also used to work for NARAL. So some of these old relationships they're reaping, and when I talked with Mary Burke last August or so, she told me even at that time that she expected some of these endorsements to happen. So I think that they were probably in the can a long time ago, and they're just kind of rolling them out. There's no question that there are people in the party leadership that believe that all you need to win is money. And I don't believe that. I think you need some other things. So, thank you.
If you have other questions, please, this is as far as the microphone goes, so you'll need to come up towards me to ask your question. Thank you.
Hey Kathleen, I'm Hans.
Hi, Hans.
We've met before.
Yes.
I'm a little afraid to say what I'm about to say because I think it may make some people in this room mad.
Oh, we don't want that.
I'm a little afraid to say what I'm about to say because I am afraid I may make some of you pretty mad at me. Okay. I'm concerned about your priorities and philosophy as a governor and the Democratic Party, you in particular, and the Democratic Party in general. I happen to think that there are a lot of working class, private sector working class people out on the sticks, basically, who got really mad. And I think one of the things they're mad about is they think the Democratic Party was not there for them. They're not worried the Democratic Party will stand up for public sector workers. They're worried, I lost my job at the paper mill 10 years ago. I don't have any health care benefits. What are these turkeys down in Madison doing, not being willing to pay anything? And I don't disagree with anything you said about the sand mining or all the big money thrown in it, but I feel like if the party doesn't come clear on that and say, we let you down, you're digging your own grave.
There have been a lot of people who felt that the recall was all about public sector workers, and that played into the results that we got. And it was about, as you know, much more. It's about what I've been talking about tonight. It's about a very few, very wealthy people who are pulling the strings in democracy. And this is not good for the local people. It's not good for the state. Because you know what? Most of those guys that work in private sector jobs work for small and medium-sized businesses. And they're just as hurt by this economy. Because what's happened in our own Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation? We've seen a series of decisions that are based on cronyism and old friends. And let me tell you, it wasn't just Scott Walker. There was an audit that was done not too long ago that showed we had some of the same problems with the last governor. There were whole parts of the state that were completely left behind, where a few very big companies got very big tax credits. And most of the people out there never ever benefited. So what do you do to change it? Sure. Oh, absolutely. There is plenty.
I don't hear you saying anything about the party coming to
I know this may come as a big surprise, but Mike Tate is not a guy that how should I say this? He's not a guy that's really paying attention to what I'm saying right now.
What's he doing in there?
Hey, I have a Saul Alinsky quote for you. When times get tough, those folks with gray hair remember Saul Alinsky, and they remember the days of rage back in 1968 during the Democratic Convention in Chicago. That's right. And you know what what Saul Alinsky told all those folks that were so disillusioned after the protests in 1968? He said, "You go home, you build power, you organize, and next time, you be the delegates." And that's what has to happen among the Democrats all over this state in 2015. But that's a race for another day.
Okay, next question.
Hi, Kathleen. My name's Roe. I live in the town of Oregon. I'm also a party member, Dane County Dem, go to a lot of meetings. Let me make a statement and then ask the question. One of the things that we can see, and you've referred to, is the Republican strategy is to distract us, but at the same time, they have common themes, common messages that are parroted daily, thousands and thousands of times. My comment and question to you is, and to take this message back to our party leadership, we need a common Democratic message. We need to have it value-lated to understand what we Democrats stand for. I think this goes closer to what Hans is saying. And at the same time, it has to have an emotional appeal. We have to have it planned, coordinated, so that all of us here in this room can follow up and take that common message. And my last comment before you answer is, a lot of us are tired of playing defense. We want to play offense. We're ready to play offense in 2014.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the question, and I've been thinking about this for a long time. I want to answer by beginning to tell you a little bit more about myself. I ran in 2006 with no money, no name recognition, and had never run for public office. I was out to beat a very popular incumbent, and everybody at the party and in the Capitol said it couldn't be done. They pretty much wrote off the campaign. I beat him by 2,000 votes, which was the largest majority of any swing district, and I did it partly by turning out 1,000 new voters in my home county of Buffalo, which has a population of 13,000 counting the dogs and the cats. So why did this happen? And why did it happen in 2010? That of all of the districts that were swing districts, that were targeted seats, I was on the top of the list in terms of the targets, because nobody expected me to win in 2006. And I won, and every single other Democratic senator in a swing district lost. And when I looked at those vote totals, I saw, and remember, I was running against Tommy Thompson's little brother, Ed Thompson, who ran for governor. Huge base. He's 60-70% of the vote in his area. Huge, huge base. I won in a bad year for Democrats because I was the only Democrat that Republicans voted for in the wealthier parts of Eau Claire. The only Democrat. So, what do we need to learn from that to answer your question? We need to learn a common language. And we also need to respect each other's culture. Because the culture in Madison is different than Milwaukee. The culture up north is different from the west. But we all share a common value. And the things I talked about tonight touch those values. If you could go back and look at the values in my speech, first I talked about public education. There's not a rural person or a medium-sized city person or a big city person that doesn't think that the school is the most important part of the community. In my community of 700 people, we have a gym filled with 550 people, all the grandmas and all the grandpas and all the little kids. just to hear the Christmas concert. If you took that school away and turned it into something run by Rocket Ship Education out of California, do you think those local folks, regardless of party, are going to be happy? Oh, no. Another value that I talked about today, local control and preserving health and safety. Somebody somewhere made a mistake when they told Senator Tiffany to introduce this bill and move it as fast as they could. Because I strongly believe that the people around Wisconsin do not want to lose protection for the health and safety of their people, regardless of their political persuasion. They don't want power taken away from the local people. And finally, the third value I talked about tonight, money in politics. There's nothing that unites people like talking about how much they don't like money in politics. So that's just a taste of what I'd like to do in the future. So hopefully you've been tantalized enough to keep a watch on me. Thanks.
I'll keep it brief. I was told not to talk in chapters. Kathleen, thanks for coming here tonight. This is great. But I wanted just to ask a question. One of the concerns I think that a lot of us have had, that we find ourselves, as Rove mentioned, often on the defensive, talking about the problems. I think it's also important to be able to articulate a clear and coherent vision of what we stand for going forward, a vision of where we want the state to go, not just to react to the latest atrocity of a Republican administration. What would you identify as the sort of primary selling points of your vision for Wisconsin?
Thank you. I'm I'm excited to be able to talk about the answer to this question. Some of you know that I put together 2 different alternative budgets in the last budget in 2011-13 and in the 13-15 budget. The most recent is posted on my website. There's also a PowerPoint that I've used. I've been running around the state giving town hall meetings related to the budget. And the bottom line is that the number 1 and number 2 priorities, not necessarily in either order, are education and healthcare. I believe that the formula for public education is fundamentally flawed. I believe that the draining of resources to private schools is a huge mistake. The state absolutely cannot afford 2 or 3 or 4 parallel school systems. I also know, because I've done the math, that in the budget was more than enough money to fully fund all of Tony Evers' budget that he requested, including completely changing the formula and holding and recognizing that certain children cost more to educate, recognizing that there's been a huge increase in child poverty in Wisconsin, recognizing that the schools, the rural schools and the urban schools need help with special ed, high-cost special ed, recognizing the rural schools need help with transportation, recognizing we need to invest in career and technical education. A long list of requests were given from Tony Evers to the governor, including the changes to the funding formula, and the governor failed to fund any of them. But there was plenty of money, $4 billion new dollars in spending, $1.7 billion in new general purpose funds. Think about it. More than enough money to totally change the funding formula. Not only that, but the governor made a huge mistake sending the Medicaid money back to the federal government and knocking 92,000 people off of Badger Care, many of whom I've met in the last couple of weeks. I believe Wisconsin and the United States face a great tragedy that no one in public office is talking about. And that is the dual problems of addiction and mental illness. This state, for 15 years, has been set on increasing penalties. And we have a prison system where 70% of prisoners have alcohol and drug dependency issues. 30% of them have diagnosed severe mental illness. 10% of them are developmentally disabled. 60% of them are there because they've reoffended. And we're spending more on prisons than we are on the UW system. And Minnesota, right across the road that I can see from my farm. No, just Minnesota. And I'm not a Vikings fan. But I can see Minnesota. And Minnesota in the early 1970s invested in community-based mental health treatment and in community-based addiction and drug dependency treatment. And depending on what year you look at, they have between a half to a third as many people that are incarcerated. And they're spending a lot more on their university system. Think about it. We can make major changes, and that's what I did in my budget. Not only did I take the money, the $800 and some million from the federal government, but by bringing in that money, I freed up $119 million in cash from the general fund that could have been used for anything. And so you know what I did? I dramatically expanded something called drug courts, or treatment alternative and diversions. Put $75 million into that. And I took the balance and put it into mental health treatment. Now you're going to hear a little bit next week. I can see by the bills that are passing that the Republicans are going to want to talk about mental health. But you know what? What they're doing is a drop in the bucket. We need to develop a whole new community-based infrastructure for the treatment of addiction and mental illness. Oh, I forgot to tell you, I didn't buy those 80 brand new vehicles that the governor did. I'm sorry. And your $1.60 a week tax decrease that you're not going to see until you get your tax refund, I took that back too. But I did put it in a savings account because at the end of this budget, there's a $750 million deficit going into the next budget, which the governor's not told a lot about, but it is there. And we need to preserve some money and set it aside and increase our reserves. And in the end, counting that and the money I didn't spend, we had almost $1 billion set aside in reserves, which is what we needed going into the recession. So that's fixing the fiscal problems too. So thank you for the question.
Hi, I'm Marcy, and I'm also from Oregon.
Hi, Marcy.
And, we've talked about how money is buying democracy, and we've talked about, how the Democratic Party has had such a hard time in the last couple of years. And I guess those last couple of elections, nationally and in particular in our state, have really divided the state, have been incredibly negative, and there are so many lies out there. How would you try to bring the truth? And what can we do to help bring the truth rather than all the lies, particularly that are bought and put on TV and over the airwaves, that people believe just because that's what they're told over and over and over again? And how can we be truthful in government and in election?
Thank you. I think the first step is to empower people with the truth. Those of you who have followed me know that I write a weekly column about what's happening in Madison and the Capitol. I send it out to all my rural newspapers. I send a lot of it out statewide. I have a mailing list of about 9,000 people that I send it to. If you want to receive the column, you can sign up on the clipboard and put a little star by your name, and I'll make sure that you get it. But the beginning step is just like those people that were on the Board of Supervisors in Trempealeau County that I told you about. We need to empower people with the facts. We don't need press releases with incendiary adjectives, which we've got a few folks in the Democratic Party that like to do. Things are so bad in the Capitol. All we need to do is spell out the facts. And those folks that are independents that vote one way one election and one way the other election, folks that live in my neighborhood, those folks can smell spin a mile away. They're really, really good at de-spinning the spin. So when they know something's not right, but if they hear the same kind of nastiness from the other side, they get cynical and they tune out. Sometimes they don't vote at all. Those are the people that decide elections. And I believe the straight talking person that gives them the facts, that's the first step. Every single thing that I put in my PowerPoint on the budget, which is posted on my website, it's KathleenVinehout.org, is backed up by not one, but several, many nonpartisan fiscal bureau documents. I can tell you the original nonpartisan source, and I can send you the memo if you question my numbers. And I think that everybody out there in public office needs to do this, because you know what? I think there'd be a lot less spin. And then we need to call out the other side. And sometimes I have noticed that even the fact checkers aren't really fact checkers. They're sort of people working the other side that are trying to spin their spin another way. So we've all become we don't like spin at all. So I think that it's important that we get the facts, arm ourselves with the facts, create this kind of communication network I talked about, and bring people together on issues that we can all agree about. That's the beginning. So thanks for your question.
Next question here, you need to, I'll try and see if you can reach.
I'm Dawn, and I live just north of Oregon. Is it north in Windsor? Windsor DeForest, which is where we're from. I don't really have a question as much as I do a comment. Hans isn't here anymore. Okay. I want to go back to his comment about the public workers and how the private may have gotten lost along the way. I'm a public worker. I'm going to be 56, and I just woke up when all this hit me square in the head. And I could see members of my family losing their jobs in the private sector. I still wasn't able to put all the pieces of the puzzle together until this lit the fire. And I think we should go back to what Kathleen did and the others that left the state, giving us time to realize what has been going on and what is going to keep going on if we don't stand together. And just the divide and conquer strategy of what was inflicted on all of us should teach us a lesson that it's not public, it's not private, it's us. We're in this together. And just playing into that division is only going to destroy us. And I think the public and the private all have a common thread. We need to keep that thread woven, and to play into this division is only going to destroy us. And I admire Kathleen so much. She's a candidate that we need, somebody that has conviction. She has a heart, and we need somebody like that. We need to work very hard, all of us, to work together and forget the division that was created that split us for years. This has been going on for years. This was just the spark that lit the fire, was this whole public union thing. So let's stand together and work together instead of playing into that division anymore. And thank you, Kathleen, for taking that stand. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next hand I saw, here we go, I think you need to come over more forward. Name and...
Mike Kramer from Stoughton, and what I'm going to say is going to get some of you people upset, and I didn't know whether I should say it or not, but the problem is too many people don't know enough to make decisions. They don't know enough because they don't spend time learning. And without people learning the facts, learning what's happening, getting more involved because they know, nothing will change. So it's nice to talk about voting for this party or that party. You have to learn about the issues. You have to get involved in those issues. But you have to start off by learning.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I absolutely agree. And I think that people get involved when an issue hits close to home. And that's certainly what I'm seeing in the West in the sand mines. It doesn't matter what political stripe you are. If there's a 1,000-acre mine that sits down next to your little piece of paradise and starts digging up, taking down the trees and digging up the earth, it's time to get involved. And the first step is to show up, and that's what those folks in Truffalo County learned how to do. And that's what we got to teach people all over the state. And it's hard work. It takes a long time. We build the arc of the future and the arc of justice, one brick at a time, but it has to happen. We don't have an alternative because the world that that I see being created in the capital is not a Wisconsin that you or I are ever going to recognize.
Hi, I'm Patricia, and I'm from Oregon. And I was at the sand and fracking hearing that you were at, and I listened to you, and I watched little darling sit there with her cell phone and play with it the whole time you're speaking. I was totally disgusted. And that's how I've been to other hearings too, where I see Groffman sitting there with her cell phone, playing with it, not even listening. I just want people to know I was totally disgusted when I go to those hearings. It's just sort of like, it's just a play. You know, they're just sitting there going through the motion. And I just want to know, how can we get Alec out of the system?
Thank you. Well, first of all, about Alec, most of the state has no idea what Alec means or stands for or is doing. The American Legislative Exchange Council is, well, yeah, it is what Congressman Mark Pocan has called a dating service between conservative legislators and the high-paid corporate attorneys that have written the legislation in such convoluted ways that it must have taken a team of lawyers to write the legislation. I have to tell you a couple little stories, but one is related to a bill that I tried to pass that would protect people's home phones. You know, the phone with the cord that you call, not the cell phone, the home phone. In many places in the state, cell phones don't work, and other folks just don't like to use them. And a bill that was passed by AT&T not too long ago, the bill would take away the requirement that if you didn't have anybody else to go to for that home phone, you wouldn't have the protection. The company could cut you off because it's too long of a way to go down your long driveway to fix that cord. Well, my bill was really simple. It just said we have to put that protection back in the law. And when I had a press conference to describe the bill, there was a lobbyist from AT&T. And I kind of went up to him and said, "Hi, buddy, glad you're here." And he said, "Well, hello, Senator." And I said, "You take a look at my bill?" He says, "Oh, yeah, but I don't really count. I'm just a lobbyist." I said, "Well, send it up the food chain. See what those folks think of it." And he said, "Well, you know, we got 17 floors of lawyers in our AT&T headquarters down there in Chicago. It's probably going to take a while before they get done looking at it." And the bill was like 2 pages long. And I began to understand how big the corporate infrastructure is behind this group called ALEC that's been around for 40 years. That's this dating service between the corporate attorneys and these pieces of legislation. I want to give you a little bit of a story related also to the hearing that you just described. During that hearing, there was a fellow from Cooks Valley, Chippewa County, and the hearing in the local control bill on sand mines, one of the things the bill did was overturn a unanimous Supreme Court decision. Now think how shocking that is. The Supreme Court just doesn't decide unanimously on anything. And they decided last year unanimously on this decision that the town had the powers to write the ordinance to protect the people and regulate the mine. Well, the chairman from the town where this decision happened came and testified. And Senator Grothman, as you know, was sitting there listening. And he said, after he testified about how bad the bill was, he said, "You know, I am a Republican, and I voted for Scott Walker. I voted twice for Scott Walker." Senator Grothman stopped playing on his cell phone, and he looked at this fellow straight in the eye. And the fellow looked straight in the eye right back to him, and he said, "You know, now I'm not so sure. And there's a whole bunch of other Republicans that are not so sure." And this man had Senator Grothman's attention. And I walked out of the Capitol with Senator Grothman. And I said to Senator Grothman, "You know, this is not a very good bill." He said, "Yeah, I know," kind of growls at me. And then I said, "You know, you guys in the Republican caucus, in the Senate caucus, you need Terry Moulton to be reelected." And you know that fella that came to testify from Chippewa County, that was Senator Moulton's constituent. And you need him to be reelected. And this isn't going to help him much. And he said, yeah, I know, there's sure a lot to think about. He got in his car. So who knows? Maybe the bill's going to die. Maybe they've overstepped their boundary. Maybe the Republicans in Chippewa County are starting to wake up. I am an eternal optimist. Thank you.
Hey, Kathleen. I'm Rick. I'm from Oregon. I'm so glad you're here tonight. Sometimes you listen to somebody talk for an evening and things come out at different times, and there's what I think is dissonance. It's like a sour note when you play a bad chord on a guitar. And the dissonance in my mind is 1.7 billion in new revenue.
Yeah, isn't that shocking?
And here's the dissonance: $760 million deficit.
50, yep. And that's just an estimate.
Okay, that's dissonance.
It's a lot of money.
Where is it? Are we being robbed blind here? That's my question.
Yes, this is a very good question. I think you've come to my town hall meetings. This is good. These are important questions we're asking. Okay, just the facts. $4 billion in new spending. This budget spends $4 billion new dollars. This is the most spending in Wisconsin history. Anybody that tells you that Governor Walker has made government smaller, they are dead wrong. $4 billion new dollars in spending. Tax, we are not broke. Tax revenue is going up. We have $1.7 billion in new tax revenue. And then we've got a lot of money coming in from other things, fees and certain tuition and federal dollars. That's how we get up to $4 billion. So where did all this money go? Well, there was a $650 million tax decrease that amounted to $1.60 person per week, roughly, depending on how much money you make. There was over $800 million in state money, in new state money that went to Medicaid, in new state money. And if you're a policy wonk like me, you'll remember that state money is matched 60-40. So 40% the state gets, 60% or a little bit more comes from the federal government, meaning a whole bunch of new money came in for healthcare. Never mind the fact that the state is serving, it's just kicked off 92,000 people. So we're spending more money and getting fewer people covered. Why? That doesn't make any sense at all. You know what's going up? This may come as some surprise. Wish I had my PowerPoint with me. Great big huge line going up. Administrative contracts to the private sector for administrating Medicaid. Way up. You know what else is going way up? Private schools. Public money to private schools. Way up. You know what else is going way up? Child poverty is going way up. Money to schools, it's going way down, and an itty bitty tiny bit got up after that huge downward curve from 2011. Well, Logisticare got turned into another new contract, but I have had nothing but complaints with that new contract. So we definitely have big issues with healthcare in this state. And if you know my background, you know that I came from a background in public health and know a lot about how to run public programs, and especially public health programs. And one of the big problems right now is what's happening in the Medicaid program. This is the fastest growing program, the largest program we have, and it is completely out of control. And when I try and get details on what's happening, the state itself has to pay the contractors to get the information. How shocking is that?
Pathetic.
Well, I could go on and on and on, but herein lies some of the problems with the way the state is managing the business of the state. Not so good. Not so good. So that's a little bit of it, but if you want more, let me know and I'll get you the PowerPoint presentation. Yeah, you betcha.
But it's not the politicians' fault always. It's the people who vote for the politicians who do such a lousy job. Excuse me.
Well, somebody was talking about reading. It's really important before you vote on a bill that you know what it does. The only way you're going to know that is to read it and then ask questions. That doesn't always happen, as shocking as that is.
I'm Kelly Sullivan. I live in Oregon as well. I am a teacher, and in the newspaper today they had this story, and I've seen this idea get bandied about, and it'll probably come up in the Senate Education Committee. The idea to add more science and math requirements. I've also seen proposals, and I don't know if this is in this what's going to be introduced, that they're looking at cutting English. So right now students have to take 4 years of English. I'm an English teacher, full disclosure, but getting rid of a year of English and then putting more science and math requirements. I'm curious as to what you think about that. I would guess you've probably had conversations about that in the past, but as that goes forward, I'm just interested in what your perspective is.
I don't think we should cut English classes at all. And I also think that science and math are good. And there was a nonpartisan legislative study council that came up with the conclusion that we needed 3, science and math, but we needed to have some flexibility in what was defined as science and math. And an example of math or science would be computer science. And right now, I think the statistics are somewhere around 2% of the students in Wisconsin ever get to have a class in computer science. I come from an agriculture area, and one of my big, one of those things that I've advocated for many years, and we did get changed in the law, was the ability to allow agriculture science classes to be counted as science. And another part of it is to allow certain career and technical classes to be counted for math and science, depending on the focus of the class. So the answer to the first part of the question about English is I don't know. That doesn't mean it's not there. It's just that I haven't heard about cutting English. But raising math and science requirements, that is something that people are interested in phasing in. It would take a while. It wouldn't change right away because we can't hold students that are already halfway through high school responsible for something they didn't have when they first started high school. But definitely there is a move to increase the math and science. But thanks for the question and thanks for your service. And everybody needs to learn how to read, including my colleagues in the legislature.
I'm Roger from Pittsburgh. The former secretary of the Department of Corrections told us that Minnesota has only half as many prisoners in the population. I don't know if that's per capita. I guess so.
It's raw numbers.
Then we do. Can it be argued that it's because we have a larger minority population?
No, because our populations are roughly the same. Certainly, there is a disproportionate number of minority people that are incarcerated. Roughly 40% of the prison population comes from one county, and that's Milwaukee County. And this goes back to what I talked about earlier when I talked about one of my budget priorities is that we need to invest in alcohol and drug addiction and mental illness. And a lot of those people that are in prison are incarcerated because of things that happened that were related to their addiction. And we need to treat addicts, not incarcerate them.
My name is Sheila, and I'm from Arna. Just following up on that, there was a report I heard on NPR as I drove in here that Wisconsin is in fact the worst state in the union for the education gap, the racial education gap between our minority students and white students. That is part of the same issue. There's been an enormous demographic change in the state, in the southern part of the state, this area for sure, in the 20 years that I've been here. We haven't yet accustomed ourselves to being a multicultural state. Would you comment on that?
That's a really good way to say it. We haven't yet accustomed ourselves to being a multicultural state. I told you how important it was that we changed the school funding formula. And I told you that all the work has been done, but the governor refused to fund the budget request by Tony Evers. Here is a very specific solution. We need to acknowledge that it costs more to educate students of poverty and students who do not speak English as their mother tongue. The resources that we need in the schools they're not there. They're disproportionate. We need to change the way that resources are given. Yes, this is going to cost us more money, but in the end, it is extremely important for all of our future that we do it. There is an irrefutable direct link between poverty and achievement. And we cannot talk about the poverty in Milwaukee without acknowledging the deindustrialization of Milwaukee. As Milwaukee goes, so does the state. And it's important that we all understand all across the state that we all have an investment in the inner city in Milwaukee. Frankly, you may not know this, but the proliferation of privately operated charter schools in Milwaukee draws down the resources of every single school district in the state. These independent charter schools that are unproven, a 20-year experiment that failed. What do we need to do? We need to invest in the infrastructure that helps to ameliorate the poverty disadvantage that those students have. And we know exactly how to do this. The research is there. Small classrooms make a difference. Students that are impoverished need an even smaller classroom to make a difference. We know how to fix the problems. But for whatever reason, the state has been headed the exact opposite direction. So the Milwaukee Public Schools districts the schools are drained of resources. The children that have engaged parents are pulling those kids out and putting them into the private schools. And the children that are left are the highest need children, special education children, children from families with serious dysfunction. And the system is being drained of resources. It's exactly the wrong direction. And all of us should have an investment in trying to fix it. Thank you for the question.
Maybe this builds on what you were talking about. My name's Brian, and I wanted to ask, there's many of the bills that keep getting passed are done so under cover and a promise of this is for jobs, this is for jobs. And we haven't really spoken that much today specifically about, what could you do as a governor? We've got places like Waterloo and Racine and up north and out west and in your district, everywhere people are hurting for jobs. What can we do to actually change things around? And really, Scott Walker even made his promise about jobs and miserably failed. So what do you think you can do?
Yeah, well, you're right. Trains will help. Trains are good. I like trains. Let's do trains. But frankly, our lead agency on jobs is one sad headline after another. The agency is run by cronies that have absolutely no background in economic development. The first thing I do is fire everybody with a political appointment over at Waiters. And then let's look at the resources that we're spending. And number one, make sure that nobody gets a dime in this state. Nobody gets a dime in this state for economic development until they actually verify that they've created a job. As shocking as this is, the WEDIC audit showed that there were 0 jobs that were verified in this governor's administration. 0, not one single job. And you wonder why we haven't created 250,000 jobs. Maybe because we have a bunch of incompetent people running the shop over there, and they're not doing the homework that they're required by law to do. So that that would be the beginning. But let's start thinking about economic development through eyes that include more than just stealing companies from Minnesota and Illinois. Because right now, both Illinois and Minnesota have an advantage that we don't have, that those of you who are gay know is an economic driver. And that's to bring in lots of gay people. Yeah, this is shocking, but believe me, there are studies of innovation and creativity that are found in thriving communities. How do we have a thriving community? Well, we're inclusive. I like that idea. We have good schools. We have a great university system. We have parks. We plow the streets. We have safe streets. Because when government does its job well, businesses thrive. And anybody that owns a business knows that. So there are a lot of things we can do different, and that's just the beginning. So thanks, Brian, for your question.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. We feel so privileged that you have been here with us this evening. Bigger than that, come on, let's give her a hand. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here with us. Your comments are greatly appreciated and your time to answer our questions.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
So, here's a little thing that some of you in this room might realize, is that not only do we have to take the governor's office back, we also need to take back the assembly.